Let's get one thing straight here, folks. Deadpool should not be the lead character of anything. He's gonzo comic relief, a bit player with a very specific bit to play, and that's where he's always belonged. Or rather, it's where he belonged once somebody figured out what to do with him in the first place. Now, look, I don't want to pile on Rob Liefeld because the guy probably does get way too much hate on the internet. I mean, fucking hell, people, you draw that many comics at once during your peak and get everyone's proportions and perspective right 100% of the time. But the fact is, Deadpool Mark I was pretty one-note even for a 90s X-Men character. Seriously, Wolverine plus the Punisher plus generically sarcastic and also a ninja. If Deadpool embodied any more overused comic book tropes of the 1990s, he'd be an episode of the Anti-Gravity Room. The character didn't really get interesting until years later when someone, Joe Kelly usually getting the credit, realized that being sarcastic asshole who couldn't die no matter what you did to him effectively made Deadpool a superhero equivalent to Bugs Bunny or Freakazoid or The Mask or whoever your particular frame of reference for that character type is, and decided to just lean into it and make him a fourth wall breaking human cartoon. And just as the straight version of Deadpool was cool in limited doses, the funny version works well for about as long. Yes, the shtick is funny, but it gets old fast. I bring this up because if there are any criticisms I imagine will be levied at Deadpool by people who are otherwise predisposed to love Deadpool, it's that Deadpool himself isn't really in Deadpool for most of Deadpool. The film basically opens at the end of the second act with our protagonist killing a bunch of people to find out where the main bad guy is, then he finds out and hooks up with a pair of X-Men guest stars to go fight the main bad guy, and that's the end. That's really pretty much it. Really, all the classic Deadpool stuff you've seen in the trailers with the red suit and the weapons and the meta he knows it's only a movie jokes essentially comprise two big action scenes which have been time expanded out into an hour and 47-minute movie by intercutting a series of extended flashbacks wherein the titular mercenary gives us his backstory, explains how Wade Wilson became Daredevil, and why he's trying to kill these specific people. It's a weird structural decision and I'm not totally sure it works on a narrative level, but what it does do is allow the movie to feel like Deadpool, as in the red-suited human cartoon bouncing around and doing bad stand-up while slaughtering people, is our focus the whole time, even though what the film is actually doing is making sure the character doesn't actually stick around long enough for us to get sick of him. And I'll be damned if it doesn't work. Deadpool is a good movie. It's not a great movie, but once you key in on the idea that it's actively avoiding being great because it knows just being good lets you get away with more, that makes it more or less okay. It's a weightless, depth-averse, easily processed lark of a thing, but it gets to where it wants to be and stays honest within its own very particular parameters. There's actually even some real heart and humanity at the core of the thing. If explored an inch or two more, might have pushed it to greatness, but again, it doesn't really want to be great, so there you go. Ryan Reynolds is of course perfect for the title character, both in personality and on the meta level, in that he's another gifted comedy actor who's been repeatedly forced into the mold of a traditional leading man by virtue of being too conventionally handsome for Hollywood to imagine him doing anything else. As such, there's something enormously cathartic and right about watching him engage in an extended lowbrow subversion of the now standard superhero movie, which he tried once before to disastrous results that the movie can't stop bringing up, which is both the joke and also about as close as Deadpool comes to having a point. In case you were wondering what the hell Colossus is doing here, the idea is that the metal-skinned X-Man is acting as a stand-in for the traditional square-jawed, morally righteous, family-friendly comic book movie lead, who, for some reason, has decided he's fond of Deadpool and keeps bugging him about setting all the violence and profanity aside to become a more conventional superhero, ha ha. Colossus is fun, but in terms of the X-Men tie-ins that Deadpool is all too happy to point out feel low-rent and tacked on, the breakout star turns out to be Brianna Hildebrand as Colossus X-Men trainee Negasonic Teenage Warhead. She has real screen presence, but it's also inspired and close to brave to add a character who seems to get Deadpool, but just doesn't find him all that amusing. A quintessentially jaded millennial who seems to regard the merc with a mouth's routine as just so much warmed-over Generation X try-hard clowning that she simply doesn't have the time for. They only really have two extended moments together, but it's endearing as hell to watch Deadpool be alternately frustrated and reactively invigorated by a kid who's already too old to put up with his bullshit. Of all the meta-humor one could have expected from a Deadpool movie, I didn't foresee that it would have the wherewithal to take the piss out of its own self-amused piss-taking. Well done. It's a fun routine, though, even if it is mainly about reminding us how supposedly edgy it is for people to be swearing, spilling blood, and having sex in the Marvel age of superhero movies, almost to the point where you might notice that it's not really that excessively violent or perverse when you get right down to it. Oh, if you're among the 13-year-olds sneaking into the screening demographic that Deadpool was clearly made for, I'm sure it'll blow your fucking mind. But anyone old enough to see this legally is probably A, again, already too old to properly enjoy it, and B, going to feel like they've seen plenty of genre movies just as, if not more extreme. But yes, it's an angry little boy movie, and as angry little boy movies go, it's probably in the upper echelon thereof, particularly when you consider how much it gets away with in terms of being, on a thematic level at least, mostly a love story involving involving Wilson and Morena Baccarin as his similarly off-kilter would-be fiancé, in a movie primarily aimed at an audience whose outlook only just started to roll over from girls ew to boobies yay. In many ways, this might be the best role Baccarin has ever been afforded in a movie. She's interesting, affecting, attractive, and evenly matched with Reynolds in terms of playfully naughty comedy chops. Even though Deadpool is actively working to undermine every moment that even begins to approach sincerity, that it actually almost does become a better movie than it wants to be is owed almost entirely to how invested we become in this central relationship, which feels earnest and sweet and real and kind of quietly, half-jokingly forward-looking in certain respects I wouldn't want to spoil. If there's a downside to all this, is that it's occasionally difficult to tell which aspects of the film are deliberately aping the aesthetic of a cheap Jack 90s superhero movie for laughs and which ones are honest-to-God flaws, because this is pretty much a cheap Jack 90s superhero movie. Are the bad guys one-note and lame because it's part of a joke, or did they just decide not to try all that hard on the villain? Does it all take place in generic action locations like random freeway, grungy basement, gratuitous strip club, and final boss junkyard because we're supposed to laugh in recognition, or were they just trying to save money? Is Deadpool's groaner sitcom punchline sense of humor meant to be genuinely funny, or are we supposed to laugh at his weirdly dated material? It's stuff like that that keeps the movie from being great, but doesn't necessarily keep it from being great fun. Deadpool is not, despite the inevitable impending overstatement, the grand deconstruction of the omnipresent superhero genre that we've been waiting for, but it's a fun B-side to the genre and a clever snark-off at the expense of its own weird moment in pop culture history. I don't necessarily see how this becomes a franchise of its own, since it's already openly acknowledging that this guy wears out his welcome really fast, but for now, as a one-off gonzo side project for the X-Men universe, it's the right movie at the right time, an amusing, decidedly well-made distraction that will likely be received as revelatory by the younger audiences who find a way to see it. It's not, of course, revelatory that is, but if there's one thing Deadpool is good at reminding us of, it's that sometimes it's okay to just let the damn kids misbehave for a while.